Dan has a lot of different roles within the workers' compensation industry. Dan Hedrick, I'm sure is known by many of you, is a physical therapist for Star Physical Therapy. He's an expert ergonomist, a functional capacity evaluator, and a job demand analyzer, as well as a physical therapist. I nominated Dan because I started to see that his hands were involved in workers' compensation in a lot of different ways. I spoke to Terry Tubbs, who was then the president of the Mid-South Workers' Compensation Association. She was working with Dan. I spoke to Nathan Hepler, who was involved with the Society for Safety Professionals, and realized Dan was involved with them. I saw Dan had written an article for the Admirable Review, and I thought, you know what? Dan is so heavily involved. Everywhere I'm turning around, I'm running into Dan. And not just involved, but leading in those organizations.
I've gotten to see how when we work together, we almost rehabilitate the system. And that's what we're looking at. We're doing it individually, but as we do it individually, it has a communal and systemic impact. And I'm getting to see that.
He has a passion for not just helping his patients get back their function, but helping them recover from their work injury, working with employers so that they can prevent injuries and help their injured workers recover, so that the employers can recover from the injury as well. It's not just his clients, the people that are paying him, that he's trying to help. He's out into the community. He's out making a difference. He's out educating, trying to help others adopt those policies and practices that have been recognized to help facilitate that recovery. He's part of the group of people that's making workers' compensation better.
And what I see from evidence is that if we communicate with the employers, if healthcare workers communicate with employers, if we communicate with adjusters, if we communicate with case managers, disability improves. And that's the name of the game.
Somebody who's just marketing a product or just marketing physical therapy services wouldn't do what Dan does. He has a lot of different connections. He's pushing, I think, all the right buttons, that he's influencing the industry so that adjusters, case managers, medical providers, employers are adopting these best practices, that he's out here helping us spread the word for people to adopt. And it's just really that level of integration, level of involvement that he has, I think, is what separates him from just about anybody else in the industry. Would you rather hire a physical therapist who's going to help somebody regain motion in their arm, or somebody who's going to help the injured worker recover from their injury? Because the impact of an injury is not just the motion in the arm. There's a lot of relationships building. There's ability to share information. And I've had a number of conversations with Dan how he's able to establish relationships with his clientele to where they're opening up and they're sharing things with him so that he can really help them recover as opposed to just regain motion.
If the employee is back to work or working at least in a modified duty position, maybe different than what they had before, the system wins. But more importantly, the employee wins.
If you are involved in workers' compensation in any type of high-level way, that you are coming across Dan Hedrick quite frequently.
Bob Pitts, he's the head of the Associated Builders and Contractors, their lobbying side. Bob has several roles. Of course, he's the institutional knowledge right now. We go to him. He has mentored hundreds of people, dozens of business lobbyists, so that's ongoing. Bob Pitts has been nominated, I think this year, not just by the business folks like myself, but also I believe Tony Farmer and Bruce Fox wrote a letter, so those are people that can be on the other side of some of the issues that Bob's been on, but they just have enormous respect for him.
Bob's primary role in the workers' compensation system is as a policy advisor to his association, as well as a significant contributor as what I would call a lobbyist with the General Assembly, and as a person frequently called upon by each of the past administrations since 1992 to contribute his insight, his suggestions from the employer-insurer side of the equation.
When you have the respect of the people in the business community, labor, trial lawyers, you've earned it, and he has. We've all learned a lot from Bob. I'm a lobbyist at NFIB, represent 6,500 independent business owners. He's the guy in the room that knows workers' comp the best usually when you're sitting in there, because he's just been around it for so long, and he's trusted. He has, I think, not only the interest of the contractors in mind, but he cares about the system working well, efficiently, predictably, and he wants injured workers to get made whole.
Although Bob has always been a lawyer, a lobbyist, a consultant, a policy expert in respect to the employer or insurer's position at this table, that position has always been tempered by a profound sense of fairness. I couldn't tell you how many times in a very heated discussion or deliberation or negotiation, I've heard Bob Pitts refer to the fact that this doesn't seem fair to the worker.
Foremost, above all else, it should be a fair system, a uniform system, an equitable system, and a predictable system.
It may seem odd because Bob and I would be considered literally opponents. We represented competing interests in the process of the development of legislation. On the other hand, I felt like Bob Pitts, more than any person I knew during the 16 years that I worked with him on the advisory council, demonstrated the same humility, the same kindness toward all, and the same leadership, quiet leadership, that Sue Ann had always demonstrated as an executive at the Department of Labor.
I started in the advocacy world in 2007, and it was kind of funny. We kind of got off to a little bit of a frictious start. We really had to kind of step back. There was a special session on this issue. It was that big. And, Bob and I and others had to work through that issue for really 3 or 4 years. And I think it worked out okay. I think the thing that has happened since then is we all realized we have a big problem with misclassification in this state and around the country. And since the cleanup of that 2007 law bill that passed, we've really locked arms with diverse groups and really worked to combat misclassification, because people need to be protected on the job site, and contractors need to have a fair shot at these bids. And so we all kind of agreed that this is something where we need to work together. So you hear a lot of friction out there about people with different views not working together. Not this issue. Bob's been part of that.
I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings with him, the Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the Senate, and he walks in the room and everybody smiles. And Sue Ann Head was the same way. Modest, humble, kind, but very effective.
Bob and he will speak his mind, and he will get your attention with his examples, with his knowledge.
He understands the system more completely as a lawyer than any person I've ever run into.
Well, he's got style. Bob has a different style. He's old school, and if you've been in a meeting with Bob, you're going to hear the ringtone. He doesn't silence it. He's got a side to him that if you get away from workers' comp, there have been times where people in the advocacy community have gotten a call from Bob and, hey, I heard what happened, and just thinking of you. So he's got a big heart too.
Well, for someone who's been around since dirt, I remember how things were back before we had a lot of reform. In my honest opinion, if we did not have a workers' comp law, we would have utter chaos in the state. There would be no uniformity. There would be no predictability. There would be no fairness and equity in the system.
I think having the diverse interests support that overwhelmingly has been, just underscores that this is long overdue, and he deserves it. And we don't want to give him a big head, but he's really had a tremendously positive impact on a better run, efficient, predictable workers' comp system. I got to know Sue Ann a little bit at the beginning of this, and she was just such a class person. And if you are lucky enough to be nominated, lucky enough to receive this award, you're with the best.
You're talking about a lady with a high school education that spent almost 50 years, her whole life, at the Department of Labor, directly dealing with one commissioner after another. And she managed to get along with, be loved by, and handle all of those personalities so well. And Bob Pitts is a similar guy.
Sue Ann was just pure Tennessee, pure fairness, and did a lot of good. So did Bob. He deserves this.
Bob and I both worked with Sue Ann Head until her retirement. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Bob, but I think anyone who knew and worked with Sue Ann Head was struck, or actually in awe, of Sue Ann's humility, her kindness, and the effectiveness of the style of leadership that she provided at what was then the Department of Labor. I nominated Bob because when I first heard that there was going to be an award created in Sue Ann Head's name, I was convinced the moment I learned of the award that there would be no person more deserving of this award than Bob Pitts.
And if we didn't have Bob at the table, I don't think we would have as good of a law as we have today.
If I was queen for a day and could wave my magic wand, then I would find a way to incentivize good doctors to continue to treat injured workers in the state of Tennessee. Our fine state is faced with a tremendous challenge in that some of the best doctors are retiring, or they have decided to no longer treat workers' compensation patients. I'm very, very passionate about this subject because I feel strongly that we need and want the best and brightest doctors, talented surgeons with experience to accept treatment of our injured workers.
I have known Sarah Reisner for almost 20 years. Sarah has been practicing law in Nashville, particularly workers' comp defense, for the last 25 years. I've known her to be a very fierce competitor. When Sarah has a position, she clings to it pretty hard and fast, but there's also another side to Sarah as well, who can be a very compassionate person with respect to the injured workers. Sarah practices insurance defense. One of the things that she does very, very well is with her own clients, she educates them. She has been to many conferences and spoken at many conferences. She has also spoken in the community. Many times she's been on cable television. She spoke on the Jesse Goldberg Show, which is a local cable show that serves the community and educates the public. In fact, if you wanted to look on YouTube, you'd be able to see that interview with Sarah. And it's a very, very candid, very good interview. There are a couple reasons I nominated Sarah. The first one has to do with a case that we tried back in Dixon about 12 years ago. The proof was in. The judge sent us out for lunch, and as my client and I were getting ready to go to lunch, Sarah wanted to know if we were going to lunch and if she could join. And I said, sure. And we went to lunch, and as we were sitting there, Sarah really got to know my client. She was talking to her, asked her about her job, asked her about her life. She really cared about this person as an individual, not just as a work comp case. The second one has to do with a client that I had that had a head injury. While we were in mediation, Sarah was reviewing the notes and was really concerned as to whether or not my client had a neurological workup. And so after we discussed it a little while, we continued the mediation so that my client could have a neurological workup. And again, this was extremely unique because I hadn't had too many defense lawyers wanting to make sure that my client had all the medical attention that we thought she was entitled to.
My vision for the workers' compensation system in Tennessee is to provide an expedient, fair, and efficient way to give injured workers the best possible medical treatment so that they can get back to the work, back to the job that they enjoyed prior to their work injury.
Sarah will not compromise her client's position. On the other hand, though, she wants to make sure that the injured worker gets all the rights and benefits that they're entitled to in order to resolve the case fairly. Sarah has a real passion for not only being fair, but for also educating her clients. She educates the public. I know that she does some mentoring work in her firm, specifically with a lot of the younger workers, younger attorneys who come along. She makes sure that they understand the law and that they know the law. And with her clients, she does a lot of this work to make sure that employers don't stumble and do the wrong thing, because that can create a lot more work for her client in the end. Well, one of the things that I can say about Sarah is when she gets a case. When she gets a case, she doesn't just send an email or she doesn't just send some letter. Sarah will get on the phone and she will talk about the case. And the first two questions are these. One, is your client getting the medical benefit that they need? And number two, if they're off work, is your client getting the temporary benefits that they're entitled to? I don't have very many attorneys who ask me those questions. In fact, many, and we have a lot of good attorneys in Nashville, but many aren't really concerned with that. They're concerned with their position. Sarah wants to make sure that the injured worker gets the benefits they're entitled to because she believes in returning the injured worker back to work. I think she just really passionately believes in the educating people with respect to workers' comp in Tennessee. And that's really, really important because if the employers don't understand the law, they're going to make mistakes. And she wants to avoid and minimize those mistakes.
The workers' compensation system does not always have to be adversarial. It is important to express civility to the attorney on the other side. It is important to pick up the phone and call the attorney on the other side and see what issues can be resolved or agreed upon. We need to mentor and empower young people in our system to reach across the aisle and to work better with the other side to achieve goals that are in the best interest of both the employer, my clients, and the employee, the injured worker. I believe that civility in the system and trying to achieve goals that are best for both the employer and the injured worker is in the best interest of the system in Tennessee. Sue Ann Head, as you know, was a brilliant businesswoman. She led with her mind, but also with her heart. And she cared deeply about all the players in the system. I can only hope and try to emulate some of her qualities.